Welcome to Conversations from the Alcove. My name is Caridad Svich. I'm a playwright and also artistic director of the Alcove, new play development program at the Lucille Lortel Theater in New York City, where we work with artists nationally and internationally on mostly new plays, but not always. And if you had not been to Conversations from the Alcove before, we are a series that focuses on chats about playwriting, theater, art, life, and the world, not necessarily in that order. I'm going to start with an audio description of myself before I introduce our guest today. I'm a fair-skinned woman today my hair is down, yay, shoulder length. It is brownish with flecks of gray, flecks of gold in it. I have bangs, I have brown eyes, I have roundish, squarish tortoiseshell glasses perched on the tip of my nose. I have red lipstick on, and I'm wearing stringy white earbuds for sound microphone things. You might see the outline of a shirt I'm wearing. It's got a black background, and you might see some little prancing dogs on it. I wanted to wear something whimsical today in dark times, wearing whimsical things to keep me entertained and moving forward in the world. Behind me is a white background. It's real. It's blurred out, but it's a wall. You might see the outline of a curtain. Today's guest is Christian Parker. Eminent director, dramaturg, and former chair of the graduate theater program at Columbia University in New York City, where he also heads the Dramaturgy concentration. We'll talk about that. That should be fun. I think a lot of people in our audience have no idea what dramaturgs do. And maybe we'll find out. Many projects in their storied career, one of them being a new commission from the playwright Dan O'Brien, working with us here at the Lortel. Beautiful new play, which I just got a draft of not long ago. So very excited about that. And it took a while, but it's really exciting. So we can talk about what it's like to get a new draft from a writer and all those things. Some recent projects include David Hare's Skylight, a Gulf Shore Playhouse, workshops and readings of frequent collaborator Kirk Lynn's completed version of Thornton Wilder's play, The Emporium, the first line of Dante's Inferno at Rattlestick, and His Heart is a Library. Oh, My Heart is a Library. Sorry. My Heart is a Library. Yours is a Museum for New Harmony Project, and Lynn Rosen's The Imperialists for Theater Works in Silicon Valley. Many, many other credits. I won't go into them that much, but there's also the world premiere of Kate Arrington's Another Marriage at Steppenwolf Theater. More importantly, welcome, Christian. If not, I'm going to be here all day reading your bio.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much. So for those of you that know the series, you know that I always start with the same question. I've added a second question to that question, but I'll start with the one that you may know, which is, how is the climate crisis affecting your art practice?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's, I think it's affecting it in indirect ways, of course, but the way in which I experience that is both as a maker and as a professor, in that the stressors that the climate crisis is putting on certainly resources in the world that could be devoted to any number of things, including art making. I think it's hard to measure this, but the popular awareness of the climate crisis is obviously pervasive, and I wonder how much it's having an impact on the already critical situation we're in with funding and resources within the arts, because so much needs to be devoted to solving some of these climate problems for those who still care about them. That's not a measurable part of the picture, but I do wonder about that, and I think, it's certainly it's an issue too that I think certainly young people and I am thinking about all the time. So, it's not that it's necessarily filtering its way into the content of everybody's work, but it's certainly factoring into the way we think about, at least the way I think about using resources that we have, not just finding the resources, but actually when you have even the resources, whether they're physical resources or monetary resources, how do you put them to use in such a way that's responsible, where you're reusing the materials, or you're not wasting materials, and you're not wasting extra electricity and time. We can leave it to the AI farms for all of that, I guess. But I think it's affecting us from kind of lots of different directions in that way. And I certainly just see it in terms of the stress amongst young people. When I say I see it in my teaching, like I think, the issues that we see in the generation or two that's younger than me, with people feeling lonely and isolated and stressed in unique new ways, has something to do with this kind of the weight of the awareness of this issue. So it's definitely, we can't escape it just because we're busy making fictional stories.
Yes, and I also think one of the things that we're starting to do here, at least in the Alcove program, is I'm trying to establish. I've developed something called the Alcove Circle, which is a group of artists, directors, and dramaturgs, and starting with the focus of approaching the new work that's being developed with an eye towards sustainability from the ground floor of the making of the work.
Yeah.
As opposed to sometimes it's considered an add-on or how, in terms of later in the production line or when it's in a workshop phase, and how that changes how that might change the way theater makers even think about the conception of the work, for example, from a dramaturgical perspective.
Yeah,
So,
how do you imagine worlds that in 3 dimensions for real stages with an awareness of resource allocation and recycling and all the rest? Like, how do you use that not to constrain your imagination, but to kind of channel it?
Yeah. Exactly. The second part of this question has to do, which I've started to add on. So you're going to be the second, I think, person that has this. Oh no, it's very scary. Which is something that I've been kind of obsessing about lately, and maybe will be for a while now. Which is how do we make art in a post-truth era when our audiences, some of them may be living in an alternate reality.
Yeah, I think probably most theater audiences, certainly in New York at least, are not living in an alternate reality. Like, our problem is more often that we're capturing audiences who are already aligned with us. But I think, and I shouldn't assume that, of course, but I think that is probably more often true than not. I think, at least in terms of the work that I'm often most interested in, and the work that I try to do, whether I've been producing something or dramaturging it or directing it, like the plays and the kind of theater that I am most attracted to, usually, even as an audience member, is sort of mining a degree of emotional truth that transcends some of the fractious sort of non-debate, I guess, we're having in this country around what real facts are. That it's, I think the theater is most effective as an art form and as a social binding agent when it is tapping into the subconscious and the unconscious and revealing psychological and emotional and intellectual truth that is not pedantic, but is underneath our daily lives, I guess, or that is quite essential. I think powerful theater hits us at our core, and we know what's true when we see it. We don't have to debate whether the facts were true, right? And in fact, the facts in a fictional play often aren't true. So I don't know. That may be a simplistic answer to the idea, but I think that's to me where we find our greatest success. It's not in trying to change, necessarily even trying to change a narrative about a subject, so much as it is about getting underneath lived experience within certain circumstances.
Yeah. Understood. Fascinating response to that question. Being the second person that I've asked that question of, I'm always curious to see
what the other response was.
I know. I can't wait to find out like how this is going to play out in the different conversations that we have. Yeah. But because I do think it just feels like a unique perhaps unique circumstance of, because I don't quite remember being in a situation where a majority, let's say the U.S. majority of the country believes one reality,
Yeah.
another majority of the country believes another. And I feel like those audiences may converge in the theater space.
Right.
And one of the things that I always think about when being in a theater space is that there's somehow some sort of shared reality that's
Yeah.
in kind, like that we all agree, like this is the thing, and then we transport ourselves into the fictional world, et
Right.
cetera, et cetera. And then suddenly I'm like, oh, wait a minute, hold on. maybe
Well,
maybe
yeah.
not so. I don't know.
I mean, I do think that the theater is, in addition to sort of mining sort of deeper truths that are revealed through action and whatnot, I think there is, the theater is particularly good at dialectics and presenting complicated arguments on multiple sides of an issue, and not dealing in absolute truths or falsehoods, right? And bringing audiences into a space where they have to tangle with their own assumptions about what's right or wrong. And so I think we can certainly in the theater also very deliberately model a kind of, not debate, because people don't go to the theater to watch a debate, but model a kind of dialogue and a kind of dialectic and a kind of sort of civic conversation that we wish were happening more, right? Like we can dramatize that hopefully well enough to keep people's interest in a way that isn't preaching to anyone, but is modeling a kind of dialogue and a kind of version of a way we might live that might reverberate for people who are stuck feeling like I stand here and you stand there and never the twain shall meet.
Yeah, indeed. I wanted to segue a little bit into dramaturgy, and maybe you're tired of talking about dramaturgy, or not. I don't know. Which is, first of all, how you got into it, and because I woke up one day and I decided I wanted to be a dramaturg.
No, I definitely didn't have that experience.
So how you got into it, and what the trajectory has been for you, because I also know you direct, and so whether those roles sometimes are blurred in your work.
Yeah, for sure they are. I mean, I think people, and I see this sort of, I've been teaching for long enough that I see this in my students, that they come into studying dramaturgy from a lot of different angles and usually from other disciplines, right? Like they're not, very few students that I've ever taught have come into an MFA in dramaturgy saying like, I knew at this age that I wanted to be a dramaturg and I only want to be it in this way. And like, that's not my experience. And I was much like that myself. As a young person, a couple of years out of college, when I was thinking, oh, you know what, I really do want to commit to going into the theater, even though if that's the dumbest possible idea, I started looking at grad schools, and I had, like many people, mostly acted and dabbled a little bit in directing, but mostly had been an actor. And so was looking at MFA acting programs and applied to some. And but along the way, while I was looking at those, I discovered Columbia had this MFA in dramaturgy, and the description of the program just interested me because I thought, oh, well, it's a field of study more than a job per se. And it kind of seems to live at the intersection of all of the theatrical disciplines. And I bet I could learn a thing or two about how all of the sausage gets made. And then maybe that would lead me into some professional opportunities, in artistic leadership of some kind that I might not be qualified for now, might not preclude me from practice in acting or directing if I wanted to do those things, but would open up some doors for me. And so I kind of on a whim just applied for that job too. I had already had an internship reading plays at a theater. I was like a script reader for a summer up at ART in Boston one summer. So I kind of had a little knowledge of what it might be like a bit, but I really didn't know. But it just sounded interesting, and it sounded like kind of artistic director school to me. And so I applied to there, and I got into an acting program that I wanted to go to as well. And I had to make a choice, and the choice was New York. Ultimately was also about New York or not New York. And so I chose Columbia for dramaturgy as a student. And then my experience of being in that program at the time, which was in the mid 90s, like wasn't exactly what I expected it to be. But I think because I had come in with all of these assumptions about it, I started to imagine building my career and using the training that I was getting to push myself in those directions anyway, to sort of think about a multidisciplinary career and one in which I might work within institutions and also freelance. And I didn't know what I wanted to do really at the time, but I was thinking of studying dramaturgy much more as building a skill set and building a way of seeing how theater gets made and being able to kind of move from, sort of kaleidoscopically around how theater gets made from different disciplinary points of views, so that I would know about acting, and I would know about directing, and I would know about play structure, and I would know about collaboration with writers, and know about collaboration with directors and designers, and learn about producing, and all of that. Just, it all interested me. So I think I just thought I was kind of building a toolkit. So more than calling myself a dramaturg. And often, actually, when I found myself in roles where I was formally called a dramaturg and people were telling me what the expectations of that role were and were not, in terms of, artistic sort of ownership and leadership and all that, like, I actually bristled against that quite a bit. So I think actually in not to get ahead of myself here, but I think in terms of thinking about the way that I teach the subject now, I talk to students about, certainly when they're applying, that I teach this as a field of study. I teach this as a skill set, as a toolbox. You may practice in multiple disciplines. You will have opportunities to do so both here in grad school and outside of here. You need not track yourself into one definition of what a dramaturg is. What you will be doing is learning, a lot of new ways to look at how to make things. And so for the right students who want to embrace that, with a little bit of uncertainty, it seems like a good thing. I think, and my own career has sort of reflected those goals. Like I didn't do everything by design, and it certainly didn't all just fall into place. But it seems, if I look back on it now, like the way in which I've been able to do some of this and some of that and wear some different hats has been a reflection of what I hoped it would be. So I feel really fortunate, actually.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about how a dramaturg works on new plays,
Yeah.
as opposed to plays that have existed for hundreds of years or even 20 years and so forth, and what the unique challenges are of working on a new work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the biggest obvious challenge is that you're collaborating with a writer who's there, alive, and has opinions about their own work. And
do they have opinions? Do they really?
They have opinions and fears. And, one of the things that I say, and as you know, Caridad, I've most of my career has been really about new plays, whether it was working from within institutions or my own freelance work. So, I say this with all love of writers and loving working with writers, but I talk to my students often about, particularly early when I'm teaching in the program, about what their collaborations with writers might look like, and what what insights I have into sort of the minds of playwrights based on my experience. Not that they're in any way all the same, but one of the things I say always is look, the playwright has the play that you read on the page in whatever draft form it may be. And they also have the three-dimensional version of the play, or whatever dimensional version of the play that is reflected on the page, that lives in their head. And everything that they see interpreted in front of them, once you get into a rehearsal room, even whether it's around the table or whether it's with up on its feet and staging a full production, whatever happens as soon as other people have taken it will never look like the thing that's in their head. And so that the essential conundrum of the playwright is how do they relinquish that idea to something else, right? And that's painful and exciting, in not necessarily an equal measure. It depends on the playwright, and it depends on the play and how confident they're feeling at the time. But that as soon as other people enter into the collaboration and start to interpret the work, even if they're doing a version of exactly what the playwright hears and thinks that they want, it's never going to be the thing that's in here. And so I think that, to me, is the space that I hope that my students kind of walk into a collaboration kind of with an awareness of, because it speaks to the vulnerability of the process and some paradoxes in it. And that, like, everybody kind of all artists kind of want to be able to control the outcome of their work, but the playwright, at the end of the day, has to really relinquish it, and get to a place of trust with the people that they've helped bring on board to do the thing. And so, in terms of collaboration with writers, I just think that's like a very baseline place to start for me, which is like, they have a thing that they made and they love, and I can see it hopefully pretty well based on what they've handed me on the page, and I can reflect it back in conversation, and we can get on the same page about what we're trying to do together. But there's still always a version of it there that I don't have access to, and that it's the potential. There's wonderful potential in that friction, and there's also some traps in that friction around, like, well, I can't read your mind, so if you're unhappy, we need to have another conversation. So I don't know. That's just a starting place for me. But
yeah, I mean, I think I want to extend this a little bit to thinking about how playwrights, if they have a body of work or they're building one of some trajectory, like it's not just one or two plays, but 5 or 10 or 20
sure.
or more, that also the plays are about how they're thinking about theater.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're seeing is not just one particular story or one narrative or whatever they're writing, but actually, oh, what does theater mean to me? It means this and this and this and this. And that's how, one of the things that I love about looking at writers' body of work is that you can actually start to see that process evolve over time. Which I think, in terms of dramaturgically, I think about, like, I also work as a translator, and I know that, often what I tell people is, like, I'm not just translating this thing, I'm also, like, translating a way of thinking about what theater is for this artist, and how they thought about it maybe earlier in their career as opposed to differently from mid-career, as opposed to if you're so lucky to work on a longer body of work of a writer when they're much later.
Yeah.
And sometimes those ideas are the same and, whatever. But part of that, I think, in terms of how they're thinking about theater also has to do with how they're thinking about the audience and who the audience is and how they relate to the audience. Some writers don't think about the audience at all when they're writing. Some do. And so how do you navigate the theater thinking and the audience thinking with your playwrights?
Yeah. That's a really interesting question. I mean, I think one of the things I can bring to the conversation about a new play and process is to step into the point of view of an audience, right? Because I think more the longer, and I don't know if you'd agree with this, but I would bet you would, which is, like, the longer that playwrights write and the more opportunities they have to see their work up, the less inclined, whether it's conscious or not, they are to protect the work from the idea of an audience being there at all. Yeah. Right, so that they're more likely to write with a kind of an assertiveness about how they want to control the audience's experience in some way, or affect it, not necessarily control it, but and they learn more skills about how to manipulate time and space, in a real ways, not just speculative ways. But I think that one thing that I can do as a dramaturg or as a director or a producer, whichever hat it is to kind of step into the space from a perspective point of view about where the audience sits, and to reflect back to the writer, like, well, this is what I think is going to come across. This is what I think is being said here. This is where I think there's some confusion, or this is where I think there's an opportunity to push harder here in this direction, or, I'm not sure that the play is communicating what you think it's communicating in this particular scene or whatever. And so that, not so that I speak on behalf of everybody, but just to sort of say, like, well, this is what I think is going to come through and where I get lost, right? And so that they have a person to talk through and to think through what they want to deliberately communicate and what they want to leave open to interpretation and not control. Because I don't think it's their job also to make sure that every single thing is spelled out, for the audience. I often talk to my students and to playwrights about, like, I do not see the role of the dramaturg as being to clarify. I see it as being to in part to make sure that the play is as complex and legible as it wants to be and as the playwright imagines it to be. But clarification isn't necessarily like a primary goal, because that tends to lean towards simplification rather than complex ideas or complex layers. So, but anyway, I think sort of being able to be a stand-in for the audience is a useful position to be able to adopt. It's not the only position you adopt, but I think that's helpful.
Yeah. And also in some ways you're the first audience as a first reader, for example, of work.
And if you know somebody's long body of work, right? Like Dan O'Brien is a good example.
Yeah.
I've known Dan since I was an undergrad. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, he was younger.
Really?
Yes, yeah. I met him when I was
man. Okay.
a freshman. So we were in a production of The Bald Soprano together. But so I've been reading his plays since he started writing plays, basically, and have been a champion of his work and everywhere I've worked. And so he and I have, oddly enough, I mean, I have helped him develop his own plays, and we have done endless readings of his plays, and I did a sort of Zoom-ish production of one of his plays during the pandemic, but we haven't actually mounted a full production together. But I know his work and his full body of work really better than almost anybody. Better than not anybody else, better than most other playwrights that I've worked with, right? Like I've been with him that way for so long. So that to your point, like when I look at the trajectory of his work, I can see how his own thinking about how to use theatrical space and how he's thinking about that, and the spareness of his language and the growing spareness of his language and the ease with which he can sort of unspool a plot. And like I can see how he's evolved as a writer in all different kinds of ways. And so I think it's easier to imagine having a conversation with him about what he's doing now as opposed to 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Just because I already have a vocabulary to describe him as a writer in general, more than just based on one play, Yeah.
I wanted to sort of open this up to maybe, I don't know if you've experienced this ever, but I always think about what happened with Carol Churchill and Max Stafford Clark around the Skriker, for example. Mm-hmm. So for those that don't know, Carol Churchill wrote a glorious play called The Skriker, had a very long and I think very successful partnership, director to playwright partnership with Max Stafford Clark at Joint Stock in England. Many plays, successful plays they had built together. And then she wrote The Skriker and sent a draft to Max, and Max was like, "What is this? And what are you doing? Like, this is not a play. Like, I don't know what this is, And it became a real, they actually stopped working together because of that. Mm-hmm. She was like, well, obviously you're not the person for me. And like, I'm going in a different direction as a playwright. Like, this is, I don't want to do what we did anymore. I want to do this other thing. I'm exploring something else in my writing. And, and that's a situation where a writer, there is a body of work. There is a conversation that's already had with a collaborator. Mm-hmm. And then the collaborator doesn't get what they're doing or kind of just doesn't, it's not their jam, right? Like wherever they've gone aesthetically or artistically, that's not what they connect to. Right. And in this particular case, it became contentious to the point where she decided she didn't want to work with Max anymore. Right. And so I wonder if you've been ever in that situation where you're jamming with a writer, you're working with them, et cetera, and suddenly they go, you know what, I want to go this way. And you're like, wait a minute, huh?
Sure. I've had that experience more as a director than as a dramaturg. I think just because, some of that's situational and some of it's also probably that you're not the right person for every play. And that's true for dramaturgs too. I think there's a myth out there that dramaturgs see themselves as just like, well, I'm a dramaturg, so I can help anybody with any play, and that's the role. And I'm so objective about all things, that I can weigh in on what works and doesn't work about just about anything. And I don't see it that way. I mean, everybody has opinions about everything, but I don't think that suggests that you're the ideal collaborator for everyone, and that if you don't have a window into a play that feels fairly immediate and personal, like you may not be the right person to collaborate on that play because you're not going to have kind of an essential sympathy and empathy for where the generative impulse of that piece is coming from, which you need to be able to source as a collaborator. It can't just be because the playwright told you why they wrote the play. I think you have to be able to find it in the text itself personally. So, you know, I've directed tons of readings and workshops of plays over the years that then got produced and had somebody else direct them, you know, and you get very used to that as a director, you know, like your stake in it is perhaps limited at a time, and you contribute what you can while you can. And sometimes that hurts a little bit because you really love the play and you really think you would be the person for the play. And sometimes, you know, and sometimes so the playwright may also agree with you, but also the circumstances of the producing situation are such that they're being encouraged to go in a different direction, or they've had the opportunity to go with somebody else that they really want to try to work with. Like there's a million reasons for it. And one has to sort of detach from the outcome a little bit in that way as a director, because at the end of the day, it's the playwright's play, and you know that it's up to them who they choose to work with. As a dramaturg, it's a little less common in my experience to have sort of parted ways with a playwright, but I also feel like that has to do a little bit with where I've sat in the field, because for a lot of my career, I built my career from within institutions. And so because I had a programming responsibility, also a lot of the writers that I was most invested in and developing relationships with over time were the writers that I thought were best positioned also to expand the programming possibilities of those theaters. And so I can't actually even know whether there were writers that I have read along the years that I liked, but didn't see as being aligned with the theaters that I worked at. So I didn't really end up developing as close relationships with them collaboratively because of the other responsibilities of my job. So that's part of it too. But I feel like, you know, there's, I don't know. I think it is true though that I have read plays even by close colleagues and people who are my friends, like where I'm like, oh, I don't love this one as much, like, or I'm not sure I get what they're doing here, or I don't know if I have any notes, but it's not because I think it's perfect. It's because I don't know what to say about this, because I'm not really sure I can get what they're doing. I think, you know, one of the advantages, I guess, of just age and longevity is to be able to say somebody that you've worked with a lot, whose work you admire and who you like personally, and say, I don't know if I'm the right person to talk to about this, or this is what I get from it. If you think I'm wrong, or if you think I'm way off base, like, don't take my word for it. You know, I think getting out of the way of the play sometimes is the best possible choice. I mean, as a dramaturg, you don't, at the end of the day, it's really not your play. So like trying to insist that you be an influence on the development of somebody's play seems like a weird thing to do to me. Like, I think it only works when you're invested in the play and hopefully also in the person.
Yeah, indeed. I wanted to circle back a little bit to Dan O'Brien, but also to writers of his stature and his longevity in the field, and how sometimes folks like Dan are perceived. I won't name any names, but I was on a panel not long ago, and there was a talk around, oh, they're still writing, as opposed, you know, and it was sort of said like, oh, I guess they're still doing what they do, and there was a little bit of like a dismissive quality to that statement, and then this turned toward craft, at which point I said, well, this writer, i.e. someone like Dan, has extraordinary craft. Like, they actually know what they're doing. Like, you know, and it's solid and it's very clear, right? And then the response was, oh yeah, craft. Oh, okay. You know, and so, you know, so I wonder about like perceptions around how people look at the work of writers who know what they're doing, who've been in the game a long time, but there's somehow this weird mistrust. How could they still know what they're doing? I don't know. Have you experienced this? Am I like going bananas here?
No. I think you're onto something. I mean, I'm suddenly flooded with a lot of thoughts about like various weird biases in the theater field. But yeah, I mean, I think like when you use that example for me, I feel like, it says more about, like most things, it says more about the commenter than it says about the work they're commenting on. And that, like, that person, whoever said that, seems to feel that, like, that writer is up to something, that either they've been repeating the same thing for a while, and that commenter is just not interested in that particular aesthetic or those particular subjects or the particular voice of that writer, and is assuming, therefore, that also lots of other people aren't either. I mean, so, on the one hand, I take all of that with a grain of salt and say, like, well, that's just about that person, and they, whoever they're referring to is not their taste, which, fine, okay, who cares? But I do think that, I don't know if this is exactly where you were headed with this, but I feel like, one of the things that I see and have seen for a long time in the theater field is, and it's reflected in funding structures as much as it is in terms of, like, biases within theater companies, but there's an obsession with the new and youth, right? And we should be embracing young writers, and we should be supporting them, and we should be teaching them craft, and we should be teaching them how to sustain a career. But I certainly, remember being a young person, and a lot of my peers, like, talking about, like, well, when do we graduate from being emerging? And then all of a sudden they've graduated from being emerging, and they're not produced anymore, and they're not commissioned anymore, and nobody's producing them, even though they've had very limited opportunities to really have that experience so far. People have, earlier in their careers, have thrown commissioning money at them and endless readings and then whatever, and then all of a sudden they're doing the same thing they've always done, and they're established writers in some way, who aren't the thing of the moment, and so they're sort of just cast off. They're not cast off; they're just kind of ignored, and I think that's a problem. Like, I think one of the reasons why the theater hasn't is struggling to sustain itself right now is that individual institutions haven't always done a particularly great job of encouraging the new alongside investing in long-term relationships with other living artists as they move through their careers. There are exceptions to this, of course, with certain writers and certain institutions, and who have had an investment over time, but you can see what that does for writers when they have that experience, right? I mean, the theater that I started my career at, actually, at Manhattan Theater Club, actually has done that fairly well for with a number of different people. I mean, there are plenty of people who would say they didn't with them, but if you look at certain writers like David Lindsay-Abaire, who's had an amazing career there, and Richard Greenberg, who recently passed, who had 9 or 10 plays produced by that theater, like that makes a huge difference. And maybe there would be people out there saying, well, those guys are just doing the same thing they always did, but they aren't. They weren't, first of all. And second of all, they've had the benefit, like, whether or not any individual person cares about what a particular writer is doing, they only get to develop what that voice is, or only get to write the better version of the earlier play if an organization is investing them in them over time. And I think there's something of that that's been a bit lost in a lot of institutions, particularly as, for whatever reason, funding has flowed towards early career.
Yeah.
And, it's part of, it's like people get a jump start and then they kind of fall off a cliff, and it's not great. I mean, we started off this portion of the conversation by talking about, like, looking at collaboration with writers and how that differs from, working on classics or dead writers. And on the, what I was going to say first was, like, well, all plays are a new play to most people, right? Like, if you're doing Hamlet, there's going to be people in the audience who've really never seen it before. They probably read it in high school, but, so if you're assuming that about whatever it is you're producing, that it's probably new, and certainly this production is new to everybody, I don't know, you have to assume that dynamic with an audience when you're trying to bring a new play to life, or an old play to life. And those people who would say like, well, that writer's doing the same old thing, it's just such an inside baseball kind of comment to make in a really small field where like the only people who are paying attention like that are insiders. If it's an interesting new play that might galvanize an audience, it's an interesting new play. They're not sitting around thinking about what X writer did 20 years ago. They're just not. They want a good night in the theater.
Right. Yeah, totally. And it makes me think a little bit also about revision. I was talking to a playwright recently who's had the good fortune, it's very rare in our field, to have a show premiere and then 10 years later or 15 years later, a remount of it in a new version.
Yeah.
That they go back into the play and actually do the rewrite that they always wanted to do, or over time they realize, hey, that didn't work. I'm trying to figure this play out still. And that's such a rare thing. And I wonder if you've ever been part of that kind of experience of a play that actually has had one life, or maybe a small life of some kind, and then suddenly the writer is like, you know what, I want to overhaul this play. I want to think about it differently.
Yeah, actually, yes. I mean, one of the plays that I was most excited to have directed in my career was Tina Howe's play Birth and Afterbirth at the Atlantic when I was there. And that was a play that I'd read it in its published form, and I had knew her before that and had worked with her before and always loved that play. And it had never gotten a first-class production, or, you know, a really significant production in New York. It had had a small, teeny little production, I think at NYU or something, and you know, prior to ours, but it never got a big premiere. When she wrote it in 1973, she started it in 1972. We did it in 2006, I think, at the Atlantic, and you know, I'd always loved it. We had done I had insisted on doing a couple of readings of it, and she initially came back to it thinking like, saying to me like, I don't know, I mean, you love this play? I mean, I love that play, but nobody cared about this play when I did it, and when I wrote it, and I moved on and did other things, and really, you think this play has traction? And I said, I do. I think there are things about it that you might take a look at, but even if not, like, I just think it's really fun and theatrical and interesting, and it's a play about fertility and couples competing about children and child rearing, and I don't know, it felt very much of the moment to me, and still relevant, and it's wild and weird, and I don't know, I just thought it would be a cool play for us to do, and with a writer that I've always loved. And I will say, like, I was thrilled that Neil Pepe decided he wanted to produce it, and she was stunned that this was going to happen finally. I mean, all these decades later. And she went back into it. And I have to say, like, it wasn't at my urging. Like, once we had the opportunity, she was like, there were always things about this play that I didn't really think worked. And there was one of the male characters that she felt she'd underwritten. And there were a couple of scenes that she thought were kind of awkwardly placed and clunky. And she didn't do a major overhaul of the play, but she went in, and she was a working playwright in rehearsal, and really wanted to like take a look at it and make it better given what she knew now or then, after decades more experience. And she certainly preserved kind of the youthful, weird energy of the play. She didn't massage it out or any of that. But I was so amazed and impressed by how able and willing she was to do that, and how much she actually enjoyed the process. It wasn't just about like, oh, I don't want this to be seen if it's going to look just like Juvenilia. Like, it wasn't that at all. She just thought like, no, there is something here, and I like these actors, and this seems cool. And she found herself being able to step back into the world of that play in a way that I was really amazed by, I have to say. Like, I mean, she was a very dear person to me over many years, but that was really a highlight for me. And it was so exciting to watch an artist who was much more senior than I be able to return to some of her earliest work. It was only her second play, I think, her second full-length play. So, that was an amazing experience.
Yeah, and I think, and I just want to highlight that, how difficult that is for playwrights to have. That sometimes you write something and somewhere in your heart of hearts, one day I hope I get back to that thing and fix it. But then time passes and you don't. Yeah. the opportunity never happens, and you're always left with that feeling of like, ah, gosh, I wish I could
Yeah,
work on it somewhere. Because also I think one thing we haven't mentioned is the pressure of first production, and what happens when a play
yeah,
premieres, and sometimes there's very little rehearsal time.
yeah,
You're working under the gun, as it were, in terms of the clock, in terms of turning
yep,
in rewrites.
yep,
Quick decisions are made, sometimes good, but sometimes a little bit rash.
yeah,
And then I think, and then so much rests on that premiere. If it's, especially if it's, as some people call, a high profile sort of premiere,
yep,
that then, if for whatever reason, you miss something, or you didn't quote fix something, or whatever, however you describe it,
yeah,
that's it. You're done
yeah,
for, right?
right.
And
Nobody's going
so,
to do it
and
again.
that play is done for in a weird way.
Yeah,
And so I wonder about the pressures of premiere from working on new work, and then trying to shepherd it into a second or third or fourth production.
yeah. It's really hard to know how to manage that process. I mean, it is a huge amount of pressure, and I think writers internalize it in a way that actually doesn't always make. I mean, you could probably speak to this more than I could, but it doesn't always make for the sort of not the not that it doesn't always make for the easiest way to make decisions, because if you're in a state of sort of heightened awareness or panic, right, like you may not be in the right kind of zone to really know how to solve a problem that you may agree exists, but like it's not, it's just sometimes the best work comes out of pressureful situations, and sometimes it doesn't. It's just it but I think that maybe, I don't know, I mean, I feel like one of the ways in which the theater world is changing has to do also with the critical community, the critics community, the critical community, and it's so much more atomized than it used to be, right? And no matter where you are, whether it's New York or some other city, that I think may take some of the pressure off a little bit, because there isn't, you're not waiting for the one paper that's going to review it and tell the world whether this is a worthy play or not.
Mm-hmm.
And the perceived quote unquote success or failure of a play, I think the critical community is weakened in many ways, in some ways. And so it's not as determined by reviews in some ways, in some places, as it used to be. I mean, God knows there are major off-Broadway theaters now in New York who can't even get the New York Times to come. So, I mean, but there's also an upside to that, which is that, like, you're not as reliant on them. You can't be as reliant on them, and you're not as reliant on them, and they don't have as much power to hurt you if the review isn't good, right? I mean, so I don't know. It's a yes and situation, I guess, but I don't know. It's a really thorny question. I remember, I mean, this was years ago, and it was a different time. But when we started the second stage that we opened at Atlantic in the early 2000s, one of the we started producing short runs of plays, of brand new plays, in what at the time was a converted rehearsal room that had been made into a student theater for the NYU students who studied at the Atlantic Acting School. And we wanted to produce more plays, and we wanted more space in our season for newer writers and for different voices than we could represent in a 3-show season on our main stage. And we had a limited budget to do it, so a lot of the production constraints were built around money. But we also made a decision at first to run the plays. We were going to rehearse 3 weeks, run 3 weeks, really short runs, and not open them to the press at all. And the idea was to say, well, this is a small theater. It's the Atlantic Theater Company. We can sell these plays. We can expose these plays to an audience. We are not claiming any future rights on these plays. We're going to open them up to the world. So they're not workshops, they're not readings, they're productions. And we'll show off these plays, and hopefully this will be a great launching pad for these things, because, if people want to write a feature about them or whatever, sure. But we weren't going to open them to critics, because they were fairly bare bones productions, but they were productions. And we learned very quickly that didn't work, because in terms of the longevity of the plays, because without reviews, writers and agents couldn't sort of sell the plays. And yet the productions were full enough productions that they were perceived to have already had a world premiere. So those theaters that would have wanted to do a world premiere of something were suddenly not interested in those plays because they'd already been done. So no, we thought like, oh no, we'll just do these short runs, and maybe even some other theater in New York will pick them up because they're good and they should. I mean, it was a really earnest attempt at kind of changing the paradigm of how new play development leads to production, leads to longevity of play and getting the play out into the world more. And it just didn't work. And that, you know, that was a while ago. I don't know, that same model might work differently now, but it speaks, the reason I bring it up is because it speaks to the essential problem of like world premiere-itis and, you know, the pressures that exist on catching lightning in a bottle around the first production of something so that it will have a longer life, you know, and that's really hard if you feel that pressure exists. I mean, the next project I'm doing is actually sort of the opposite of that, which is that like we're doing a production of Kirkland's play, The First Line of Dante's Inferno, with La Mama in February, and you know that's a play that we've been working on together collaboratively as me as sort of director, dramaturg, and Kirk obviously as the playwright for a number of years, and it's a weird play. It's totally accessible, but it's formally a little innovative, and we knew that, and particularly now, it was not likely to get snapped up by you know, an institutional theater, and so we just decided to find a way to do it. And it's a production that we're going to do just because we want to do the play. And fortunately, we're in a position in our careers and our lives that we don't have to attach the same kinds of stakes to, you know, well, this better launch it, or the right people better come so that they'll pick it up, and you know. We're not sort of attaching those stakes to it at all. If that happens, that would be amazing. But we're not even thinking in those terms. We're just doing this play to do it because we believe in this work and want to work together on this play. And we have an actor who's been attached to it from the very beginning, who we want to have do it, and she's, you know, on board. And it felt like a logical partnership with La Mama. So it's just like that. That's to our great good fortune that we were in a position to say like, we're going to do the heavy lifting to make this happen, but we're not attaching those stakes to it. But I understand why that's not usually the case. Like normally, you know, you put in all this work and it's hard to make a play, and it takes a long time and a lot of resources. And if you feel like you've got one shot at it, and then maybe nobody else is going to ever do that play again, it can be a really daunting prospect and isn't necessarily great for the rewriting process. Sorry, that was a really long answer to your question.
No, it's totally delightful, and I'm so glad that you went in depth with it. I mean, it made me think a lot about casting processes as well, yeah, in premieres, and how sometimes, I won't say the show, but I was working on a piece once, and somebody came in and auditioned and they were brilliant. And then the rehearsal process, they were not so brilliant.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that, like, whatever we saw in audition never happened again.
Sure.
And no matter how much we tried, and I feel like, oh man, I've miscast this part, and it's a huge part, and what am I going to do? And it's a premiere, and oh my heavens, and I just was tearing my hair out about it. Yeah. You know, and I always had that feeling of like, there's also that thing, I mean, it's the vagaries of just working with human beings, right? You know, not robots, you know, so it's like, you're also up to like, who's going to be in it, and like who, and people will associate that play or that part with whoever was in it the first time, and you know, all of that happens with it. And sometimes you're like, well, maybe that person was cool, but actually they weren't as great as I wanted them to be, you know. And and I think that as playwrights, you know, you're not allowed to say that usually, but there's a reality, right? There's also a reality of like, you know what? There were like 5 people, and that I wish we'd had that other person.
Yeah,
and it affects the life of the play, you know.
It does, but it's also part of that goes back to sort of what I was saying earlier about like there's the version of the play that you as the writer have, and I don't mean you per se, but writers have in their head, and the way they hear the music of their own language, etc. That like may not be exactly what the actor that you hire does. And sometimes that isn't necessarily a bad thing. That might be an additive thing. And sometimes it isn't exactly right. but it is also part of that, like, well, that's where all this is a risk. Like, you build a creative team and you hire people and you get in a room and people invest in it and they have their own points of view on it. And then it becomes a thing because there's only a few weeks to put it together. And, one of the things that I'm glad I'm not a playwright in that respect, because I feel like, the thing that then you have to sit with what it is and be okay with that. And that, like, choices were made and some of them couldn't be undone, or you didn't know in time to redo them. And, it's okay. Everybody did their best, or hopefully, and, on we go to the next. I mean, but it's a tough thing when what you really hope for is, like, I'd like other people to also want to do this play so that it is not just done once or is only ever read by people. I mean, I get that. It's a tricky proposition, all of this. Particularly in a climate where, like, newness and youngness and world premieres have been, at least, so much the focus of a lot of programming. Like, you feel like there's only a few plays maybe every year that end up getting the kind of traction that would actually make not only would help establish your reputation and your ability to have future plays produced because your work is getting out there, but also enable you to eat. Right? I mean,
enable you to eat.
Most people aren't expecting to really make a living, writing plays particularly, but wouldn't it be nice if licensing your plays could actually generate a little income? I don't think there's anything wrong with aspiring to that.
No, it's a good thing. I think, wanting to have the plays to have more life and to have a life that sort of goes beyond you and,
right.
Gives you a little bit back, is you've spent so many, sometimes you spend years working on a play, right? And you feel like, all those years, I hope I can get a little bit of something back for all that time.
Yeah.
Because it's a lonely business, you know what I mean, of writing and I think also developing work. And there's so many sometimes blind alleys that you go down and trying to get a production to happen or a reading to happen or a workshop to happen. And as funding the climate has gotten more stringent in the last, even 10 years, people are scrambling. I mean, that's just the bottom line. People are scrambling to get anything up, even people with renown and with all the bells and whistles behind them, you know what I mean? And so I think that it's just it's a tough time. And I think that, acknowledging that is important. And I think it also is about, sometimes it's also about stepping back and saying, okay, what is achievable in this climate, and being super realistic about it, as opposed to, again, I won't name names, but there was a writer who was like, I'll have a reading in New York and everyone will come. And I was like, dude, what are you talking about? I felt bad. I felt bad because I was like, I mean, they're not from New York and they never had a reading in New York. We're like, and the whole industry will come. And I was like, and the play will get picked up. And it's like, dude, that's not how it works. And I wish it were that way. And that's...
You don't want to rain on people's parade, right? But it's like, yes, I mean, it doesn't work that way. And I mean, that's the thing. I mean, of course, and somebody should be happy that somebody picked up wanted to do a reading of their play in New York, no matter in what circumstances. It's just,
of course.
And I want that to give people hope, but it's also it's often a ruse. I mean, one of the other things that I certainly tell writers and dramaturgs to be clear about is well, if you're getting a development opportunity of any kind, find out what it's really for, and why is that reading happening? Are you just part of a reading series because they need some plays to be in a reading series, or are they actually really interested in potentially programming this play? Who's going to be there automatically, and why are they going to be there? So that when you're entering into a collaborative process, just even putting together a one-day reading, you know what you're doing there.
Yeah. And if it's just to work on it for the day, then you know that, right?
That's fine. Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that, right? But I think the expectations need to be clear, right?
Yeah. I think a lot of people get their hopes up that that one day reading that's just to give you an opportunity to work on it with some good actors who may or may not even be totally right for it, is actually for something else, right? I think people just automatically hope that there's actually some other string attached or some other possibility that maybe isn't there. And I think it's it's really incumbent on whoever's putting that thing together to be clear about that. But I think also artists can ask the question gently in a way that doesn't seem confrontational. That's, like, well, okay, great. I would love to do a reading of this. Like, why is that happening at your theater? Like, what is the level of interest in this play, or what's this reading series for, or who who thought it up, whatever that is.
Yeah, and it's just about being proactive about your own writing life and your own artistic life. I think there's nothing wrong with asking those questions. And I think sometimes artists feel, oh, I shouldn't ask because then they'll feel bad if no, I think there's ways to ask where you can just be very clear about what are the goals, what are your goals and what are my goals. And sometimes if you know what the theater's goals are, you can be like, okay, I get where you're coming from. I'm going to come in with my own specific goals on a reading. And then, and it'll be what it is.
I don't think it's, like I said, I don't think it has to be about being contentious or demanding more than the theater is offering. It's just about like, well, I want to make the best use of the time that you're offering me. So it would help me to know whether we're auditioning the play or whether I'm just getting to mess it up, or whether, or whether you even care what I do with it or whatever, or whether there's a possibility of something else later, or, but it's not an audition for the play. Maybe you already like it enough. Like, who knows? I mean, it's not, I just think there's versions of that conversation that can happen that often don't, because people are afraid to bring it up or afraid to say. And sometimes it's from both sides. I mean, like, the theaters are not, like, somebody who's your biggest advocate inside a theater may feel that they're alone in that, and that they haven't yet persuaded their colleague or colleagues to get on board with something. And so they're protective of the space around, well, what do we really want to do here? And it's out of an interest in kind of protecting the relationship, but it's often, unfortunately, creates a situation where there's a real lack of transparency or clarity about what the whole purpose of the thing is in the first place. So I think it just requires kind of, ongoing bravery on the part of both sides every time anything like that happens, to actually have as honest a conversation as possible about, like, what can be gained here. And I think if writers don't want a particular experience that's being on offer, it's okay to say, like, I don't need that right now. There isn't, I think people are afraid to say no. I mean, I believe in saying yes to things, but I think sometimes if it's really not right, or you don't feel like the circumstances are going to help you, it's okay to say, like, thank you so much. Like, I appreciate it, and I would love to bring you my next thing, but I don't need this right now, or I don't think it's the best way to spend our time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think being clear and honest about stuff, in the long run, your life is short, and you gotta pick your battles, right? Where you're going to place your time and energy when it's when it's, I think, of the essence. We're at time, but I wanted to end with maybe some things that you're reading or watching, or things that are inspiring you these days. What's inspiring you?
Inspiring me these days? Oh my gosh, that's a good question. What's inspiring me these days? I have to say, a couple of things come to my mind. I love a procedural, so I've been watching Slow Horse. I'm like, oh yeah, I mean, not in the theater, but on TV. But like, I've been watching Slow Horses, which I've been like slow to get on that bandwagon, but it's so good, and it's just I don't know. I find it, even though it's like high stakes, espionage with fascists and the whatnot, like I find it just like a bomb to me. So like that's been sort of good. The other thing that I've been finding I'm sort of drawn to, I guess, is, at least in theater, or is not so much theater, or in performing arts, is dance. Like I'm really, like, I'm not going to it all the time, but I was at a piece the other night as part of the Powerhouse International Festival at Brooklyn, and it was reminding me how much letting go of my well-trained dramaturgical instincts around narrative and story, and actually allowing for kind of a deep immersion in an aesthetic experience that can be emotionally evocative, can be so refreshing, as somebody who works in a predominantly narrative form most of the time, like, to be in a live performance situation where actually the dominant elements aren't story and narrative and character. And I've, So that's part of it. I've been teaching a course this semester on sort of where dramaturgy shows up in other art forms besides the theater and outside the rehearsal room. So I've been thinking more in terms of how story and some of the principles of dramaturgy that I talk about with my students appear in the strangest places. So that's sort of what I've been
So
thinking.
cool. I love that. So much fun.
Yeah, we're going to the
Yay.
museum. We're going to the Tenement Museum for a tour on Friday. I'm excited about that.
Really awesome. So
Yeah.
cool. Well, thank you so much, Christian, for spending time with us and sharing your wisdom and insight. For those of you that follow the series, you know that what I usually do is say so long to you out there in the audience, but then stay offline just a little bit with our guests afterwards to a different kind of so long. If this is your first time to Conversation from the Alcove, welcome. There are many episodes prior and to come, so check us out. We're on YouTube here at the Lucille Lortel Theater. For now, so long.
Bye.